Sally is going to share now. Sally is the founder of Known Healthcare, as well as part of LMCC at the Lower Manhattan Community Church. And so Sally, why don't you go ahead and begin to share just kind of what you've seen about kind of the witness of Christians throughout history. So if you can introduce yourself and go ahead and get started, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Sally Whitman. And Drew, I think, are you going to bring up the presentation or did you want me to? Okay, wonderful. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so it's just such a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Just a very quick background about me. I have been at Lower Manhattan Community Church for about 10 years now and have served in different roles as a lay leader. I've also have a 20-year career in healthcare administration. So I've led things from physician offices to hospitals, to startups. And about 2 years ago, I was pretty dead. I was dying in my faith and I was dying in my passion for healthcare and for making change in healthcare. And what I was seeing was that we just couldn't really change anything. We had lots of ideas and passion on how to bring healing to people, but it was failing. And in the church, I was just falling asleep. And many of you have heard of what happened at Lower Manhattan Community Church a couple of years ago. I was a part of that. It was this miraculous move of the Spirit that can't be explained. It wasn't expected, and it changed my life. What it did was it turned that heart that was dying, a heart of stone, into a heart of flesh. And God gave me a new vision for what healing and healthcare could look like if He was leading the way. So if you could go to the next slide. So what that led to is Drew was so kind to call me the founder. Actually, the founders are a team of people who have similar backgrounds and desires to know God's heart for healing. And what God has shown us is that this is really about bringing healing and revival to the people of New York City, body, soul, and spirit. So what we say is that we are enlisting all of God's tools for healing and healing all of what makes us human. So everything from a cold to the emotional health of somebody, to inner healing, to spiritual health. And so we're really excited to be building that. And it's no better time for something like that than after what we're experiencing with COVID. So like every other organization, we were in a time of, okay, now what do we do with COVID? And so we had to pivot. And on that pivot, we decided to look back throughout history and see what churches have been doing all along, because this is nothing new. We need to go back and find out what these pioneers were doing. So if you go to the next slide. So we start all the way back in the 200s with the plagues of the Roman Empire. The Christians became pretty famous in this time because what is written about them, and some of the words that I love on this slide, is that they were seen for their unbounded love, that they went straight to the sick and they healed them, they ministered with them, and they showed them Christ. If you could go to the next slide. And then about 100 years later, still in the Roman Empire, plagues were happening over and over again. And Christians continue to shine, and they continue to be on the front lines of caring for the sick and dying. And what I found most fascinating about this research was that Christian death rates were actually lower, even though they were on the front lines of caring. And so what happened after the plague is that Christians came out physically stronger, spiritually stronger, because they were rooted in this message of hope that no one had ever really seen or heard of before. And then they were relationally stronger because they had formed these bonds inside and outside of the church. And so many of you know that this is really where they think the Christian church grew overnight, really from 1 million to 6 million, largely in their response to these plagues. So if you could go to the next slide. So fast forward to the 14th century, we really start to hear some more figures emerging and writing about what it's like to be a pastor and a leader in a time of a plague. So now we're talking about Martin Luther in 1527. He writes a lot about what he did during the bubonic plague. He decided to stay in the city and help. He cited Matthew 25, 41 through 46 as his guide for why he decided to stay. And he wrote this fascinating tract that I highly recommend. You can Google that, Whether One May Flee from a Deadly Plague. And in that, he really talked about how Christians needed to be blending compassion with duty. So following the laws of the state of how to quarantine and how to not get people sick. And then also just being wise about taking medicine. So that was, I just love that even in 500 years ago, they're still talking about similar things that we're talking about. So next slide. And then cholera in London, really Charles Spurgeon stands out as a writer during this time. And he writes about, for his choice also, he decided to focus on pastoring rather than his preaching. And he stayed in the city and he went to the homes of people who had previously scoffed him because they called him in and they said, now we want to hear about this gospel that we've been making so much fun of you about these years. Now we want to hear it. And love became the aim. He visited the afflicted and dying, and these grief times turned into glorious occasions of faith and joy. And he did three things. He pointed out the sinking sand of the world. He preached that Christ is the rock, and he loved his neighbors. And if you can go to the next slide. And then the Spanish flu, is really what we've all been talking about as the most recent. And this is really where, churches were ordered closed, but they still gathered. Some were arrested and others did outside worship. This is Instagram of the 1900s. And what I loved about this is I found this article that talked about women, from local churches taking care of epidemic orphans. This is very personal for me because my great-grandmother died in the Spanish flu, and my grandmother was 8 years old when she died. So she was effectively an orphan. She had 3 little sisters she had to take care of. And I can imagine the Christians surrounding her because she had this amazing life of faith that was really this light to me growing up. So they must have been doing something in that time to help her through that time as well. So last slide. So what I really found that came out of this research for me, and it was so inspiring to me during this time, is that in the times of plagues, since the beginning of time, the church has modeled Jesus's compassion and went to the side of the sick and dying when they could, so the next bullet is also saying that in the time of Martin Luther, he said we need to follow the rules of the law and we need to lean on medicine as well. And then Spurgeon saw it as an opportunity to spread the gospel to ears that were more willing to listen. They loved and cared for their neighbors, both believers and unbelievers. And they seem to have this resilience during the epidemics. And then there's this rise in Christianity afterwards, because the way I see it is that it's almost like they proved what they'd always been saying, right? So they put their time and energy where their mouth had been, and they showed people who Christians really are. And that is a message of hope that I just wanted to share with you today. I'm a little over time, but Drew, thank you. And I hope that you get as much blessing from this as I.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sally. I love this. And we have some folks that were asking for the slides. If you wouldn't mind leaving that in the chat box for folks, I think it just gives such a tremendous vision for our time. And again, sustainable mission, especially during this time, is something that we're all looking forward to do it in a healthy way. A couple of weeks ago, we had Jordan Rice from Renaissance Church up in Harlem on, and he was talking about a generosity initiative that they put together. And I thought it was really just encouraging to hear the results of that. So Jordan, if you wouldn't mind just sharing, as we talk about this idea of generosity, can you just share what you guys have done and and kind of the update on what was the result of your generosity initiative?
Oh yeah, definitely. First of all, thanks so much, Sally. I can't wait to see those notes. Really, really great stuff. So one of the things that we wanted to do was to hopefully be a light, to care for people, obviously, while social distancing. So we did an initiative called We Spread Love. And the name was somewhat of a double entendre, in the time of coronavirus. And also it's a name that we've used before. But essentially we were giving away a week's worth of our offering and challenging people towards radical generosity and to give money to people who are affected negatively by COVID-19. We've specifically chosen just to give money to people in Harlem. They don't have to go to our church. They don't have to believe in Jesus. We've let our deacons kind of oversee the distribution of that. And our church really, really responded extremely well to that. We raised $130,000, which is about 5 times our normal weekly offering. And people just felt so connected to the mission that we could be caring for people. And so far, we've distributed about 50,000 of that out of that 135. And I think that accounts for about, I think it's about 80 to 100 family units that have already received care. And, we send them a Cash App, Venmo, whatever it is that they have. Our deacons kind of are in regular communication with them to make sure that they're doing okay. And so yeah, it's been really good. We've had so much connection with people who didn't hear about our church, don't want anything to do with church or Christianity, and also just caring for people in our own community. And so that's been one way that we've done something, and it's been met with a lot of enthusiasm. People are asking, when are we going to do it again? I'm like, well, we do actually need to have a general, offering fund. So, but yeah, it's been really good.
That's awesome. Jordan, and what was the goal that you guys placed when you guys
first?
Oh,
yeah, definitely. So the goal was 50,000. I was like, if we doubled our normal weekly offering, that would be amazing. And I mean, we hit 50,000 like day 1.
Wow.
I mean, it was insane. I mean, and then also it created a pathway for us to really show a reason for people to be generous with us in this season, and for us to kind of talk almost unapologetically about generosity and the Christian response to the coronavirus, because we were leading the way. I think it could be difficult for some of us if we're challenging our members towards radical generosity, if the church itself is not positioning itself in some way. It doesn't have to be 100%, but in some way towards generosity in that way.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Love that story. I was so encouraged when I saw that post, and yeah, awesome. Elise Chong, who is the executive director of Hope for New York, which many of you guys know is an organization that really serves the most marginalized communities here in our city. She's going to be sharing next week, because we're going to be really highlighting different ways that churches can get involved with vulnerable populations during this time next week. But Elise, maybe if you can just give a quick blurb, shout out to what you all are doing right now with some of those organizations.
Yeah, thank you so much, Drew. First of all, that was such an awesome update from Jordan. Thank you. That's amazing. So encouraging. So, I mean, Hope for New York partners with over 60 organizations across the city. And, we are serving one of the most vulnerable populations right now throughout the city. And, as of mid-March, over 95% of programs have been either suspended or modified due to this virus. And so it's been super challenging. And so the way that we've responded is, Hope for New York, typically we send volunteers and financial resources, capacity building. So we're doing all of that. And, we're helping our affiliates convert to virtual volunteering, which we know is challenging and is still a transition. In terms of the, response financially, we also started a Hope for New York Relief Fund, which was about 2 weeks ago. And we're still in that campaign, and we're hoping to really challenge the radical generosity that Jordan just mentioned. And we're hoping to really support our affiliates well during this time. But it's been a big challenge. And so, our call to Christians really is to pray, to serve, and to give. I think those are the 3 ways that we're calling everybody to action right now.
Yeah, thanks so much, Elise, and thanks for serving all these different populations. Again, we're going to hear more from her next week, along with different affiliates of Hope for New York that are serving some of the most vulnerable populations. Another update on ways that churches can get involved. We're actually going to show a video right now that Dr. Matthew Suh is going to comment on. And so we'll cue that video right now about another very practical need that's arisen right now in our city. So let's go ahead and cue that video.
Hi, my name is Dr. Matthew Suh. I'm a board-certified general surgeon and the New York City area director for Christian Medical and Dental Association. We're here in New York City, the heart of COVID-19 epidemic in the United States, and we are in Central Park to interview Dr. Lance Plyler. Dr. Plyler is the director of World Medical Mission, the medical department of Samaritan's Purse. Dr. Plyler, let's do an elbow bump.
Hey, Matthew. Good to be with you today.
So thank you. First, I want to thank you for serving and saving the lives of New Yorkers here. And we really are so appreciative of the work that you and your organization, Samaritan Purse, is doing here. Dr. Plyler, would you tell us about the Samaritan Purse's work here in New York City?
Absolutely. Matthew, first of all, we just want to, on behalf of our organization, Samaritan's Purse, we're so appreciative to the city, to yourself, CMDA, just the warm welcome we've received here to be able to respond. Our efforts are, of course, just to work with the people of New York City, the healthcare system here, in particular Mount Sinai. We're just here in Central Park. It's a bit surreal, but we've really just set up shop. We've established, as you can see, a 14-tent field hospital to work in conjunction with Mount Sinai to help fight this, raging disease that's really had such a significant and devastating impact on the people of New York.
Yeah. Dr. Plyler, I understand that your team members here are called DART.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us about DART?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a division, Matthew, within Samaritan's Purse. It's our Disaster Assistance Response Team, or DART, as you mentioned. And yeah, it's really, that's the department within Samaritan's Purse that really enables us to respond to whatever the given disaster is around the world.
Thanks for that video, Matthew. Matthew's on the call right now. Matthew, can you just give a quick, what are the practical ways churches can help with that hospital that's been built by Samaritan's Purse?
Great, thank you very much, Drew. You may be wondering, so why did you just watch that video? Well, even though the Christian Medical Dental Association is a membership of Christian doctors and dentists, we actually don't know all the physicians that are in New York City. And that's the part where we're asking you to help because we need you to help us find these doctors. So I'm just going to show you a quick slide here. If you could, if there are any doctors and nurses, actually, we need a lot more nurses than doctors. If you know of any doctors or nurses that are in your church or in your circles, if you would refer them to this address, bit.ly/help-sp, capital S&P. This will take your doctor or your nurse to a website which has all the information about how they can volunteer with Samaritan's Purse. Our doctors are actually, for the most part, very much tired working, but there are still those that can help out. And the Samaritan's Purse will actually pay them a stipend to work with them for 2 to 4 weeks. Thank you very much, Joe.
Thanks. So any doctors and nurses who they should be referred to you that perhaps can help with this field hospitals. That's right. So I just listed that link.
Absolutely.
In the chat box. Thanks so much, Matthew.
Great.
Someone
Thank
else.
you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Someone that I got connected to recently was Eva Ting, who manages the building over at Hope Westside, who's worked with funerals and things like that for care for families and grieving families. And she's actually going to share some of things that she's been processing about how churches, especially as I know that most churches now, there's been deaths of people that we love. And she's just going to share about processes that churches can take to care for those who are bereaved and who are grieving.
Thanks so much, Drew. It's good to be here with all of you, and thank you, Matthew, and all the healthcare workers for the good and important work that you guys are doing right now. So like Drew said, I serve as the director of the W83 Ministry Center at Redeemer Westside, and part of my role in the last few years has been helping families coordinate memorial services at our building. In the 5+ years I've been there, we've done over a dozen memorial services, mostly families from within the congregation, but also a few from the neighborhood. And in doing this aspect of my work, I've actually discovered a personal sense of passion and calling to walk more intentionally alongside folks through this aspect of end-of-life services and care. So this is something that I've been exploring outside of my day job at Redeemer as well, as a passion. And I've started training as an end-of-life doula. And so what I hope to share with you today is actually from the passion hat. And I'm definitely not an expert, but I'm actively learning, and I'm hoping that these resources, many of which I found actually outside of the church sphere, can be folded into the church world and used in ways that can really bless our communities and help them through this really difficult time. So I have a PDF that I shared with Drew, which I can also upload to chat later, but I'll be referring to that PDF. And it's basically resources I've collected. So COVID-19, social distancing plus high mortality rate means a really huge impact on our communities, not just now, but for months and even years to come. And so these are resources I've pulled together that can hopefully help us navigate this new world that we are in. And I want to sort of talk through 3 general topics that this PDF will hopefully help provide resources for. So one is personal grief. There's a lot of general grief resources out there, so I won't spend too much time on that. But I think the thing that is for us to consider right now is social distancing. You know, that really has a really unique impact on grief. A lot of folks we know who have lost loved ones due to COVID-19, they're not able to say goodbye. They're not able to go be at the bedside of their loved one. There's a lost sense of closure, perhaps, and they're unable to grieve with other people afterwards. There's no physical presence that we can offer right now. And so that's a huge impact. In the article section of the PDF, I've been able to include some firsthand experiences from people. So for those of us who haven't interacted with that in our communities yet, I think that will give us an empathetic look into what that experience is like. But I think there are some questions that perhaps are good for us to thoughtfully and prayerfully consider. One example is in this grief process. What does that look like when we're not able to physically be with someone? That tactile, physical element is such an important part of processing grief. So how can we prayerfully and creatively respond to that? You know, are there ways that we can use objects or create things, have some way of letting people hold on to something or create a sense of physical presence? So those are just some questions in that area of personal grief. Another area is collective mourning, and that, you know, in our current circumstances, we cannot gather together. We're not able to physically gather together. And so funeral services and memorial services look very different right now. And so a few things to consider in that area. Technology is playing a big part, as it is with everything else. Zoom is now suddenly part of our vocabulary, like Google is. And so even in this area, you know, a lot of people are using Zoom as a way to have a virtual attendance if they do a small and brief service. There's ways that funeral homes are using Zoom to do online visiting hours. So with technology, though, there's always this issue of accessibility and availability. It's very tricky. Not everybody has access to the technology. Not everybody knows how to use the technology. And in this time, when it's already stressful and people are going through grief, it's hard to think about, now I have to set up something on Zoom. And so I was able to find a couple resources that were provided from a funeral planning service that's actually based in Canada. And they've created step-by-step guidelines for how to actually set that up. And so that's a resource that hopefully can be helpful if you have any members of your congregations or communities who need access to something like that. Another section, if you go a little farther down, Drew, there's actually several websites that allow ways to create online memorials and online obituaries. And these websites have actually existed before COVID-19, but I think they take on sort of new meaning and new function in our current situation. And so those websites, a lot of them have very different features. And so that's also something to consider in terms of if we can't physically gather right now and people need to feel like they're with people and they're able to mourn collectively, are there ways to use some of these online platforms? There's also social media. Actually, a member of our team who had tested positive for COVID-19 recently lost her mother, who passed away due to COVID-19 in a hospital. And so since our team member was quarantined, she couldn't be there. She couldn't see her mother. And for her, a way to process that grief and mourn with other people was she actually created a video and photos that she put on Instagram. And that was her way of saying, expressing her love for her mom and her loss and interacting with other people in that way. So those are some examples of, ways that people are trying to be together and engage together in a time when that's not physically present. And I think the heart of it is, it's people losing people they love, people that matter. They're not just statistics. They're not just numbers. And this is a deep loss. And this is a love that they want to be able to express and tell the world that this person mattered. This person matters, and they want to mourn with other people. And so in our current challenges, I think we as a church have opportunities to be creative about that and to really press into that and think about how do we walk alongside people right now. I think one thing to perhaps acknowledge is that I think there will be a lot of delayed memorial services in a year or 18 months from now. That is a trend that we are seeing across the events industry in general. Everything is being pushed back, which means that a year or 18 months from now, there might be a lot of memorial services or end of life celebrations. People will have time to plan for that. They will be able to hopefully gather together. So what does that look like? And maybe a question for those of us with churches who have buildings, there is a question of how do we love and serve our neighbors when that opportunity comes and people are looking for places to gather and we can physically gather again? Are there opportunities for us to minister to our neighbors in that way? And finally, just some thoughts on funerals and memorial services planning logistics right now. I've included on that PDF some articles about the general current funeral environment. There's also some general COVID-19 guidelines that are shaping how funeral services are being planned. And then there are some New York City specific resources as well. Funeral homes are overwhelmed. They are really overwhelmed right now, and they are also trying to abide by COVID-19 social distancing guidelines. If they are having gatherings, they're very, very small, very quick services, and they're trying to incorporate technology. So one aspect of this that I'm sure we all recognize is the financial part. This is an unexpected expense, and it's hitting people when a lot of folks are going through financial challenges already. The city actually does have a general burial assistance fund that's set up by the Human Resources Administration, but they only fund up to $900 towards total expenses of $1,700, and they serve primarily lower income New York City residents. As of right now, there's no specific fund set up to help with COVID-19 related funerals. So that's something I think for us as communities to consider as well. Are there resources available that can help people either financially or through this process of navigating all of this? So I hope this is helpful. That's a lot of information.
Yeah, thanks.
But I will share the PDF in the chat box, and then I'm happy to talk to anyone else who has any other thoughts or questions about this. So
thanks. Is it cool if we pass on your email address to people as well?
Of course, yes, please do that. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much. And, before we get to Dave Gibbons has joined us from California. Before we get to Dave, I just thought also, this has thrown a lot of curveballs into ministry itself. And Kathy Bruce is a dear friend of mine who's actually was in the process of planting a church, or she was just about to get started. And this has obviously thrown a curveball. And I thought it'd be helpful to hear from her about how she's navigated some of those curveballs. So she's just going to take about 5 minutes here to just share about that. So Kathy, if you're on here.
Thanks, Drew. So I've had the privilege of being on staff with Drew at Hope Midtown. We were in the process of shifting, and so I hope I can give you some encouragement as God has shown me how to pivot. There are 3 things that the Lord has spoken to me specifically in this season, and the words were, trust me, don't miss what I'm doing, and keep going. We started this core team of our launch team a year ago as a creative arts home group. We shifted into a vision team in January, set a timeline. Our desire was truly to be an Acts 2 church, focused on Acts 2:46 every day. They continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. So eating, fellowship, reading the word, prayer, being filled with the Holy Spirit, these were all things we were looking forward to. We had a timeline set up. Our building that we were going to gather in was supposed to be open in May. We were going to start services in person on Pentecost Sunday. And then things started to unravel in March. As we all know, our denominational assessment got canceled. We ended up coming up to our house. We have what was supposed to be a vacation home about an hour outside of the city. We realized it was the best thing probably to stay up here and not in Midtown Manhattan. And we also realized a bunch of our launch team members, some are on this call today as the Hope Nomad Peanut Gallery, were alone in the city. And so we brought them with us. And within a week, many of them had lost their jobs. So that first week, I was full of despair, helplessness, probably like many of you. I was questioning, as God changed my call to plant? I was helpless to physically help people. I jumped on every pastor Zoom call. I got Zoom fatigue. I knew I needed self-care. The only thing I could figure out to do was just to take care of these people under my roof. We had 7 to 8 of us living here in this house, and it was my family and my core leadership team. And God said, trust me. Second week was full of lament. We literally have a mountain outside here. I went up to the mountain and I wept. We kept gathering, Wednesday night gatherings, lamenting and worshiping. I started thinking about 9/11. Maybe some of you went through that, like my husband and I did when after that happened. We actually helped plant a church after that time, and I knew that we would be needed. Our church would be needed just like back then. I've been spending a lot of time in Lamentations. One, if you know, it says, how deserted lies the city, once so full of people. But Lamentations 3:22 says, because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. And second thing God said to me was, don't miss what I'm doing right now in this season. The third week here, I realized I was pastoring a house church. Pretty much what we were doing, eating together, community dinners, praying together, worshiping together, being creative together. Our creative group started finalizing our logo for our church, our website. We started an EHS group. We filmed our launch video. We have been more creative here at this house in the last 3 weeks than probably the last 4 months we had started working on stuff. My worship pastor, we were supposed to bring up from Georgia, he's composing music and leading us in worship down from another state online. He lost his job, but God is still sustaining him. And that third week, God said, keep going. And so we're in our fourth week. We just finished that, and we've been talking with Drew about going ahead and launching our Sunday services in May. Our church vision is to be a home for those searching for hope, and that's truly what we aim to be. This is nothing like what we planned, nothing, but God has been completely answering our prayers to be an Acts 2 church and giving us a firsthand experience of that. And so it's been messy. I'm not going to lie. I'm wearing many hats. I'm a wife, a mom, a pastor, a spiritual mom. Self-care has been the big game changer for me, but I honestly would not change a thing. And so if this is an encouragement to you, trust him, don't miss what he's doing, and keep going.
Wow. Kathy, thanks so much. And what a story, what an encouragement. And just to clarify, when you say you're going to launch services, they're going to be Zoom services.
Yes,
we're
going to be Zooming it like everybody else.
Yeah. So what a gift. And I know that you've been through your process of grieving, detachment, and then, bringing up resolve. And so I appreciate you very much. Thanks for sharing. Hey, we have a special guest this week, along with everyone else that was a special guest. We have Dave Gibbons, and he's actually a pastor and a mentor, and someone that I've looked to countless times for leadership and wisdom. He has such a prophetic voice, and he was one of the first voices that he was sending us notes as this crisis was happening to different people that he knows around the country. And I was just so captivated by the prophetic kind of words that he would give to a lot of us. And just the wisdom he was sharing about organizational leadership, personal leadership. And so, Dave, if you can go ahead and share, you're on with a bunch of New York City pastors and ministry leaders. Would love to hear from you, and just for this moment.
Hey, just first of all, just my empathy, my heart goes to you guys. You know, I'm from the East Coast too. I grew up on the East Coast, worked on the East Coast in New York City, you know, for 5 years in Manhattan. So I feel your pain, and we do on the West Coast. So you know, we're all families. We're with you. But yeah, I'm excited to share with you today whatever you guys want to talk about. You want me just to hit Drew some ideas?
Yeah, I'd love for you to just, if you can even give a flyover of that initial email that you sent with just some themes about what leaders should be thinking through. I thought was so helpful. If you wouldn't mind hitting on those and whatever else comes to mind, and then we can take questions as needed.
Yeah, got it. So right now, I don't know if you guys know this, but true north is moving. Literally, scientists have said the magnetic pole is drifting 34 miles a year. So in the last 20 years, over 600 miles of the pole has moved. The South Pole has stayed pretty steady, but because of the movement of the magnetic true north, it's actually caused a recalibration amongst military, different organizations on how they compass things. And they said even in the molten core of the world is bending. How crazy is that when you think about it? You know, because we don't even think about that. But what that tells us from a physical perspective is that everything's shifting. This is not a new normal. This is actually a normal. And I think for a lot of us, we're just catching up to the normal that's been going on for many years, because we've been caught up a lot in our own vortex of how we do things. And it's not bad, because we know we're trying the best we can, and we've been given things to do church. And but what's happened now is everything's gotten deconstructed. And so we tell people we have to really reconfigure how we navigate the terrain that's new to you, but it's actually businesses have already adjusted to this. Like the business I'm associated with, I've worked as a consultant as well as I'm a pastor. I'm an advisor to 3 companies. And so about 60 to 70% of my energy has been towards working with these corporate leaders that are in the arts in Hollywood as well as in Silicon Valley. And so we're in touch with about 60 of the CEOs of the main consumer tech companies that are out there. So they have some of the most recent data in terms of the reality. And so based on this, we told leaders that you have to expect that this is not going to be over. Like everybody wants to go back to normal, they say, but this is normal. Things have adjusted, and they're going to keep adjusting and be very volatile. Our forecasting shows it's going to be at least 18 months where, you know, you'll see some type of economic recovery. If so, you'll see ups and downs a lot. So churches and organizations already have slashed 15% of their budget. And then we're suggesting that you go to a plan B. If things get worse in your churches, you go to 30%. And if it gets really bad, get ready for 50%. So you just have to think through these scenarios, because a lot of this is being a leader that's ahead, and your people will trust you if you're dealing with real stuff and you're not just talking like superficial optimism, but you're optimistic and you're hopeful, but you're dealing with the realities, you know, with the deck that you've been given. And that's quite possible. So we tell people, you know, deal with the reality that things are normal and that you're gonna have to readjust the way you allocate your resources. Now, as a church leader, what I think is critical, I had this dream, it's really crazy. A few weeks ago, I dreamt that I was in Korea. And when I was in Korea, and I don't remember my dreams, by the way. And I think the reason why I was dreaming about Korea was because I've been watching a ton of Korean dramas. Okay, so don't get addicted to these man, they'll ruin your life. But I was watching this one, you know, these Korean dramas. So I'm dreaming about Korea. I was walking down in this amusement park or this nature park, and I found some money. And it was like Korean won, which is the currency. And it was like a wad of it. Man, I was so pumped, man. I found all this currency. So I put it in my pocket. And then one of my fellow pastors who's next to me, he ran by me and picked up another wad of cash in front of me. And I was going, dang it, man, he got that. I could have gotten that too. So I couldn't believe he took it. And then I picked up my stuff. I ran ahead of him because I wanted to see that person drop more money. And so I cruised past him. I turned the corner and I found another wad of cash, man. And I was like pumped because I have to admit, I'm a person that can be greedy. I don't mind, capital. And so anyways, I took all this money and I put it in my pack. I went to a shelf, and then this other guy, Andrew, he followed me, and we were counting all our money when this park ranger came up and says, "Hey, I need to see that." And I go, "What?" He goes, "Well, the currency, the one that you found." He goes, "That may be someone else's." And he goes, "Give me some of that." And then that's when I woke up in my dream. It was like 3 a.m. And I felt, God speaking to me. And he said, "You cared more about getting more money than caring about the person who lost the money." And that just, man, I just hit my heart. And I started weeping because I said, yes, I think that's what I've been doing a lot. We care a lot about the programs, getting things moving, getting the number, whatever it is. I mean, they're all good intentions. But I think what the Lord showed me, hey, Dave, what I want you to focus on is caring for the people. Let everything you do drive caring for the people. So if these were your sons and daughters, if this was your mom or your father, how would you care for them? If you literally start thinking in this framework, the way you grow your church, the activities you do shifts. The way you customize things, the way you talk to people, it won't be maybe sometimes as didactic as it will be dialogical. If you think of people like this. And so with that in mind, we set these design principles of how do you navigate the terrain. And so a lot of this comes from the valuing of people again. I want to encourage you as New Yorkers, and I'm telling this to church leaders globally, this is really your opportunity. You heard from the very beginning about the historical consequences that Christians didn't run away from the pandemics. They ran like into the fire, and God protected them. So it doesn't mean that we're not protected and we wear the garments and the mask. What it means there is we don't run away from this moment. You don't run away from the moment and the crisis. Because what you need to see is that the crisis that has now occurred has become your opportunity for advancement, because there's no better time for those of us that really know Jesus to be super creative. And the thing is, you don't have to be think of something entirely new, because some of you are frustrated. You go, what new thing do I got to do? No, it's the old stuff. It's the ancient stuff. What the church was really about. It was loving people. And so what's fundamentally shifted now is, instead of just focusing most of our energies on weekend services, which are great, they're wonderful. What's happened now is you actually have to talk to people on Zoom or on Messenger. You actually have to engage people. So I told our staffs around the world, I said, this is actually the work of the ministry. You're actually talking to people and listening to people. This is what 80% of your job should be doing. I go, the programming should be a secondary allocation of your resources. Because if you fundamentally care for people, think about this. If you have 10 generous people in your congregation, they can support one full-time pastor. But what happens is, if you just think largeness, efficiency, you get a lot of people, and then you spread your energy all over the place, but then you don't really have like people who are ready to go to war, people who are really ready to fight and to get in the battle with you. You have people that are coming, they're checking things out, and then you get sidetracked. So I think what's happened now is we're actually, God in a gracious way has allowed us to develop our muscles again of pastoral care and support, and becoming like the true fathers and mothers we should be in the city, where we're not just kind of putting our kids through a program and come to our weekend little show, because your kids don't want that, right? They want mom and dad to be with them. They want mom and dad to hear them out, not to preach at them. They'll tell us, I already know what you're going to say. And I tell pastors, honestly, I said, let's be real. I go, how long is it going to really take you to share with somebody everything you know? I go, come on, be real. I said, if I'm honest, I said, not very long, man. I said, I'm not sure if a person stays at my church for 30 years, man, if they're not going to hear some repetition. And they start to get used to my voice. And isn't that why maybe some people get cynical and they start to be sidelined? So I say, what if we start thinking literally like we're moms and dads, like we're Professor Xavier, and our churches are like academies. And we have a boutique academy. We don't have to have thousands and hundreds. Maybe you get 10, maybe you get 30, maybe you get 100, 300. You can change a city. You can change a nation, man. Come on. So, you know, I started a church today. Did you guys know that? I started a church. I put it together in 1 week. I've been dreaming about it 15 years. I'm launching in 4 or 5 different locations globally. We already have like 200 people that are in the church in 1 day. So to me, it's like, this is your opportunity. But how are you going to do it? What guides you is not just the big numbers. What guides you is caring for the one. How would you love your son or daughter? What would you do let that strategy drive you than thinking, man, I got to put together a big program to get people down. No, okay, yes, you do. And the most significant part of the work is muscle development of caring for people. We're listening to them, you need, and what's going to happen is this. And I'll tell you, I'll be straight up with you guys. I made more money from my consulting than my pastoral work. And so what happened in the last 2 years, I realized, you know what? The job that I do as a pastor is a consultant, it's an advisor. And basically, if you can consult and develop your people, it's a win-win. So the game has totally changed, but the game is an old game that we as pastors and as leaders, we know this game. But what's going to require of you is not to be in fear, but to look at what you already have within you. I mean, you have amazing gifts and talents to shepherd the nation and shepherd your city, to really love them well. So don't run away, but go back to the design principles of not just getting a gathering of large people, but how do you care for the one? When you fundamentally dig into that, the programs, the processes, your language, all starts to shift. So let this be a shaping, adapt to the environment. So 3 things real quick, I would suggest practically. Number 1, parse your product. Parse the product. What that means is you have to deconstruct all the treasures you have as a church. Like there's all these wonderful treasures of content. How do you parse and deconstruct it and make it so that it can go on multiple platforms? Because, you know, in regard to like when you think about the social scene, every generation has a different social platform. So boomers love Facebook, you know, then you have the Instagram generation, then you have Snapchat, and now you have all these gamer platforms that people gather on. There are all these, so every subculture or generation likes their own platform. So in the same way, we have to think, I don't just speak one way. I actually need to speak different ways. I need to morph and adapt to the context and culture without the compromising of myself and the compromise of the truth. So it's almost like you can speak a truth, but you gotta learn different languages as you travel around the world. In New York City, you have hundreds of different languages. So you can speak the truth, but it's gonna require you to listen and learn the language of the people, of the different subcultures. So parse the product, parse your context. You have to really break that down, is listen well, what's the language, what's the platform, and adjust my languaging, adjust my programs, my processes to that generation. So everything I'm doing now, if you look at what we're doing at New Song and the groups I'm working with, we've literally shifted everything we've done to tailor it to the new norm to us, where we're not just online and in person, we're both, man, because this is the future. What we're doing right now is the future, where you have to start engaging and discipling people this way. This is a great way. For boomers, they don't like this because it seems like this is an addition. It doesn't seem real. But for I generation, they have no trouble with this. This is intimate. Introverts love this too. They don't have to talk. They don't have to talk. They can put it on mute. They don't have to show their face. So introverts love this. The I generation loves this. So we have to get really used to this type of stuff. It's going to get better too. So you just practice your muscle on it. Parse the product. The second thing I recommend is position your people. This is the time that you really need to look at your staffs, the way you staff, because primarily our church have staffed around Sunday weekend programming. And really it needs to be staffed around people development. You know, it's almost like your consultants, your advisors, your coaches. But don't fall prey to the superficial coaching stuff out there. What we got is a sacred trust from Jesus. And then we've been given a toolkit and we've been given the power of the Holy Spirit to have the X factor, which is way above the game of any consultant. He can help you see things prophetically. He can help you nail a person down in terms of who they are and deconstruct them and give them a design for how they can maybe live their lives, you know, or to help them walk along their journey. So position your people. Look at your staff you need to position them to another role. Because if they're not doing Sunday programming for the next 18 months, and that's not the main game, then what are you going to do? And maybe they may need to be launched into another direction. That's okay. It may be very hard, but you got to be willing to let some of your staff be launched. And so you have to really look at your staffing and reposition your staff.
Video. Okay, well, you.
Yeah. Hey, Zach. What's up,
I'm the
Zach?
better pastor.
Hey, Zach. All right. It's okay, bro. So position your people. Position when you think about this is also including your CEOs, your business people, your artists. What you want to do is at this time, as you speak to them, get to know their context, because as you listen to them, you can actually know how to serve them in their context. A lot of this is the one-on-one stuff. And this is where, if you know how to communicate this, you can become part of their staff. So imagine you have access to all the people you're trying to get in your church. You have access to all of them in the company. So this past week, I spoke to a national company of all their employees, and a lot of them are not Christians, but they gave me a platform to speak to them about how to navigate the pandemic. It's amazing. You get to be dropped in Babylon, man. Come on, how awesome is that? You're parachuting to Babylon. Babylon's not just a city, like New York or LA. No, Babylon is like in the middle of a secular ecosystem, of an institution. See, that's one thing. It's one thing to walk a city. It's another to be dropped into a building of a company where there are people who aren't really caring about our God. You got that moment. The last thing I would suggest is perfecting the process. So this is about operational excellence. One of the leaders that we work with that works with Tesla, he was one of the executives, and he's now a part of our team in Silicon Valley. And this guy is amazing. I mean, he's a Christian too. And he said something like, when he was with Elon, this idea of money, they're trying to raise money. I think they were trying to raise, I forget, it's like massive amounts of money. Let's just say like he was trying to raise, it's about 300 million, I think it was, 300 to 500 million. And so anyways, I think he raised like something like $1 billion or something crazy, astronomical. And so he came back to Elon and said, hey, listen, I raised this much. Instead of this much, I raised this much. And Elon said, I don't want it. Give me the smaller amount. I'll just take 300 million instead of $1 billion. And he goes, what? He goes, yeah. He goes, if we get the billion, we're going to be lazy. And, we're not going to be as creative. Let's just go ahead and take, the smaller amount. All right. So those three things I suggest, you parse the product, position your people, and then operational excellence.
So good, Dave. Wow. Thank you for that. I almost feel like we could get a bevy of questions with each of those. I'm just going to read some questions that people have written in the chat box here. If stay-at-home social distancing lasts 18 months, like what you talked about, what would the permanent changes be for churches post-COVID? Will many permanently revert into small micro-church models? What are you seeing and what are you sensing?
Well, I don't think the extent that social distancing is taking place now, I'm not sure if we're going to still have the exact same, right? It's going to be morphed. So you're going to see you're going to see social distancing, but it's more physical distancing. So I think we have to be clear with our definition of this. It's a physical distancing that's going to be there. We don't have to be socially distant, because you can be socially connected online or through phones or through Zoom. So we have to use the right terminology to frame this. So it's a physical distancing that has changed. So what that means is, I think some people who are doing the services at home, they actually like it better. They're thinking, dude, I love this. I can wear my pajamas and go to church, and I can sing worship music, and I can wear my boxers. This is awesome. And then I can have my donuts. I don't have to look good. So I got a feeling a lot of people are gonna like that type of thing. And that's okay. What's wrong with that, man? It's like they could be family. They don't have to dress up, because it's a pain in the butt to take families in the cars if you got little kids. I mean, that's the worst trauma on a weekend, is getting your kids ready to go to church. And so to me, it's like, yeah, why not, man? But let's serve them, because that's my daughter or my son, and I see how hectic their lives is. Yeah, stay home and yeah, just tune in. and they still can give because we're concerned about the giving. They're giving because you're still sourcing them. So I think that the change that's going to be is the physical distancing, and that you're not going to probably sometimes have as much, but some churches will continue to grow because it's the nature of their church. They have a gifted leader, they have the big systems in place, which is fine. But you have to be prepared that there may not be the same numbers, but in a physical place, but they'll be scattered, which is okay. The thing is to make sure you set your system up to equip people, whether they're in a house or a car, or whether they're in your physical location. So what we're now in is a season of and, not or. Okay, so it's a service on weekend, and then you also have like the development of people outside the box. But the outside the box muscle again has to be really developed. How do you treat your church like an academy where you're doing offline school stuff and online, or online or in person? I mean,
Dave, can you share, like you shared some of so what you just shared, is that what you've shared with your church staff as you guys have pivoted? Like, is this basically the same message that you've said about like, hey, parse the product, people development, and position your people in perfecting the process? Has that been your message? And how have you guys pivoted to what you're doing now?
Yeah, great question. So I basically told the pastor, I go, hey guys, this is such a great time. I go, we actually get to do what God wanted us to do probably. We get to love people, man. And we don't have to worry about setting up the Sunday service. And I said, let's just go love our people. So I said, hey, so we technically, I said, I'd like you to put together your schedules that 60 to 80% of your time is talking to and intersecting with people. In the past, it was like they'd be in their study, their offices, preparing programs, weekend execution. I said, hey, I want the majority of your time face-to-face with people. I go, see how that's going to be so much. It's going to be de-energizing maybe sometimes for you, but you're going to find out it's so rewarding. And so we said the same thing. In fact, I went over the same points through this week with them to remind them. And then practically we had them readjust their schedules. And then I asked the team 4 weeks ago, I said, hey, whenever there's an opportunity like this, that means we're supposed to also create. And I said, don't get frustrated. You don't have to create something out of nothing. But again, it may be parsing the product. We look at all the things you've done. How do you parse it out and recreate it so that it morphs into the current situation? And so, there's a different language, a different target audience. And so, practically, it's like, for example, Brew Baker, who's really creative at our church, he put together a whole venue called Movie Church. And so he loves films. And then, so he does church in his car. He's the preacher in his car, and he talks about films, and then he brings scripture and ties it together. So he created Movie Church. I created a thing called Love Mob. I said, you know what? We need to help restaurants out. And all my friends are owners, and they weren't getting traction. And so I said, what if we get several hundred people just love on one restaurant where it's in a unified way? Because I heard that it's very difficult when people just come, it's not of a benefit, as beneficial. So I said, what if we just gather and just love on one? So we just started creating all these things where we gather people to create and to recreate. But yeah, it's the same messaging.
Wow. Man, Dave, I mean, just talking to you, I get so energized just because you're one of those few who, gosh, the energy that's coming from you, especially in this moment, is really amazing. Hey, we only have a couple more minutes here. Dave, do you have any final words for us? Obviously, we're at ground zero. It's been a brutal time here. As you know, I mean, you have so many friends here. Any just final thoughts for us? Many of us just trying to, just catching our breath now. We're looking at like the long run. Any final words?
Yeah. Okay, so I heard this, and this is true. This is a true story. In Africa, if you're going to the deep, dense jungles of Africa with a tribal person, there's elephants there, there's lions, tigers, the whole gamut, snakes. How in the world, like as a New Yorker or as a LA person, how would we survive? I mean, we would survive, right? So one of the guys I was with this past week, he went in with tribal people into the dense jungle. And so night was coming down, so it's getting cold, and there's still animals lurking all around him. He says, dude, how are we going to survive tonight? Like, what are we going to do? And the tribalist person who's the guide said, well, are you going to wear your clothes? And they go, yeah. He goes, well, you're going to die. He goes, if you're going to survive out here in the jungle, you have to take off all your clothes and get naked. Then you have to put on the mud and the poop. Spread it all over your body, your face, everywhere. Put the mud and the poop all over your body. Because, you know, in the jungle, there's lots of poop. If you just look at an elephant, they have like, I think they drop like a couple 100 kilos of poop a day. That's a massive amount of poop. I mean, we think dog poop's bad, but can you imagine elephant, a couple 100 kilos a day, man? That's nasty. So he says, put that all over your body, and then you're gonna blend in, they don't smell you. And I go, oh man, this is really good stuff, because how are we gonna survive the wilderness that we've gone into, the jungle, the lions and the tigers that are all around us? You gotta get transparent, you gotta get vulnerable again. Keep it real. This generation, they don't want the fluff, man, and they can tell your marketing tactics when you're being nice to them, to bringing them to church. Come on, how ridiculous is that? They smell that a mile away. You're being nice and loving, and then you're gonna hook them into church. That has to go away, that type of philosophy. Your love has to be pure, that you're just gonna love them regardless if they go to church or not. And so what that means is you're focusing entirely upon God's dream for them. Again, if this is your son or daughter, they're not a Christian, what would you care about? You know, in God's time, they would come to know him, but you would just purely love them, help them achieve their dreams, whether it's school, whether it's an entrepreneurial initiative. So transparency. Number two, you have to wear the poop and the mud, man. You have to deal with it, embrace it. If you talk to any psychologists and social counselors, they'll tell you that part of dealing with anxiety is you have to own it. Give the anxiety, give the stress a name. You call it Joe, you can call it Bertha, whatever you want to call it, man. And say, yeah, you get that anxiety coming on, that stress. Like, come on, man. Hey, Joe, good to see you again. And then you got to let that anxiety stay in there a while. You feel it, own it. But then start breathing again. Refocusing yourself, staying curious. What's God doing in me? Because you're redirecting your blood flow, your oxygen back to your brain, but you're letting the Holy Spirit to re-energize all yourself. And so what it is be transparent, and then own your stuff and real with it and share it, because there's no way you're going to be able to create the new landscape and to be able to navigate what's ahead unless you're really seeing the reality. And to me, it's the Nehemiah story once again in 2020. The only way you're going to really be able to build a city in 52 days or build the walls is if you see the destruction. You have to own the poop. You have to own the mud. You're in it. But God can deal with that. This is nothing to him. He can turn that poop and that mud into fire. All right, I just gave you your illustration for your sermon this week, man.
Oh, I love it, man. I love it. All right. Hey, Dave, thanks so much, man. We're out of time here. I want to respect everyone's time. Dave, thanks for joining us, and everyone else that was on the call. Again, we've been doing this every week, guys. We'll post out notes as well, and PDFs and all that stuff, just as a resource for you guys. Next week, we're going to be hearing more from different folks here in New York, like James Roberson from Brooklyn, Josh Kelsey, Edwin Colon, Red Sevilla from Elmhurst, and Elise, like I mentioned, who works with Hope for New York. So guys, thanks so much for being here. And yeah, Dave, thank you so much. Appreciate your prophetic insights. All right.
Yeah. Hey, just to encourage me before you guys go, it's not about either or again. Remember, it's the and. It's online and in person. So I saw some questions there. Okay. God bless you guys.
Love it. Thanks, Dave.
Yep.